Today we're going to be talking about hobby projects. And no, I'm not talking about building bird feeders or quilting. I've got the legendary Jeremy Lee back on the program today to talk about sports cards. If I consider myself a hobby veteran, Jeremy is a Hall of Famer with his 40 years of hobby experience and his ridiculously successful podcast, Sports Cards Live. In this episode, Jeremy shares insights such as helping us define projects in the hobby and his approach to collecting sports card sets, how he makes a project more affordable if the checklist is out of hand, unexpected thoughts on player collecting, benefits of digital organizational systems versus pen and paper, practical techniques to put your cards to the test to see if you truly love them or if they should head to the chopping block, and challenging the premise that collectors should deeply examine our why of collecting. Today's an episode that any card enthusiast will enjoy, since Jeremy always brings insights that aren't specific to any player or sport, but rather digs into the psyche and practical procedures of collecting. What is up? Welcome back to Fondling Cardboard. I'm your host, Mike Lakusta, aka the Golf Card Collector. Well, it has not been all fun and games in the Lakusta household. Sickness has continued to rage on for me and the family, and all the home remedies have come into play. Tea, honey, a quick trip to the pharmacy shelf for some Tylenol cold and flu pills, and a shout out to all you old Ukrainians throughout my life that encouraged me to eat sour cream and raw onion to fend off a cold. And not only that, but our oldest, who's 2.5 years old, started potty training. And let me tell you, I didn't think much of potty training. My wife certainly took it more seriously and encouraged me to read a book on it. And gosh, I'm pretty darn glad that she did, because training a toddler on something as serious as using the bathroom is no joke. But hey, I know you're not here for the potty talk. You're here because of our common love, passion, and outright addiction to cardboard collectibles, sports cards. So the 2024 Upper Deck Golf Checklist is out. Check it out. I'm not sure if it's on Cardboard Connection yet, but I did see it on the Beckett website. That's why I like having options when it comes to our reference websites. If you didn't already, check out last week's episode of Prizm Golf with Jeremy Lee. He had all kinds of amazing things to share relating Prizm from other sports to what we should expect to see in golf. And if that's a topic that excites you, tune in next week, because we are going to be unlocking a new character on the show, which, by the way, is a catchphrase of this individual. Now, this person self-identifies as a Prizm simp, and we will be talking all about the new Panini golf cards. That's right, I'm going to have Brett McGrath from Stacking Slabs next week. I've also been working on some other collaborations behind the scenes, and I am so pumped about what's coming down the pipeline in the coming weeks and months in the Fondling Cardboard universe, both inside and outside the lane of golf cards. Another thing to check out is next Monday, my friend Paul Hickey got to interview a senior vice president from Panini about the new Live Golf partnership and the upcoming Panini golf cards. I personally can't wait to tune into that episode, so be sure on Monday to tune in to Paul's sports card strategy show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And heck, he might even let me snag the audio from his interviews and incorporate it into one of our future Fondling Cardboard episodes about the upcoming Live Golf partnership. So let's see. All right, before we get to the conversation with Jeremy Lee, just lend me one more minute of your ears, because I just have to get some stuff off my chest about performances from some golfers that I've had my eye on, one from the PGA and one from Live. First, let's start with Matthew Wolff from Live. He was playing so well at Live Las Vegas. If he had just held on to those final 5 holes even par, he would have been in a playoff with Dustin Johnson. Or even if he had shot 1 under in those 5 holes, he would have won the tournament. But instead, he finished them 2 over par, came solo 4th place. Still a good showing. And then fast forward to last weekend at Mayakoba in Mexico, and he pulls out in round 2 due to illness. man, this guy can never seem to keep up his momentum, and sometimes it's tough being a collector and a fan of somebody who's not always showing up, but that's okay. Nobody's perfect. I wish him a speedy recovery from that illness, and I'm sure he'll bounce back this weekend in Jeddah. All right, moving on to the PGA. Will Zalatoris is playing well. He was looking really rough in his return to action about a month or two ago, as I talked about when he and Tiger made their debut returns again together. But every showing since then, he's been looking better and better. And according to the data experts on the First Cut podcast, he's performing on the big boy golf courses. Tee to green, he is one of the smartest players. And he got a hole-in-one, his second on tour. Over at the Genesis Invitational, he was a runner-up finisher, second place. He would have actually won if Hideki Matsuyama did not go full ninja and fly up the leaderboard with a 9 under par in his final round to win it. So these are all really good signs for Will Zalatoris cards and Will Zalatoris collectors, since his rookie cards are still recently new. Hideki has some cool cards from back in 2021 Leaf, so check those out. All right, I'm going to throw it over the conversation with Jeremy Lee, where we started off talking about projects.
There's an infinite number of ways to approach the hobby, and everyone in the hobby is doing a project. If you're putting together a collection, your project is curating your collection. Now, you might be less organized, you might have less focus than others. So the true project-based collectors, who can also collect in other ways too, but those people have specific things that they are trying to do. And so your question is, how do you find one that works for you? Because there's an infinite number of ways to do it. You can be a team collector, a player collector, a theme collector, 500 home runs, 500 goals, whatever the, Hall of Famers is a very popular one, of course, award winners. Maybe you want to collect every player from the team that won the championship in 1997, whatever league it is. So there's a million ways to do it. But when I think about a project, and I'll speak about my projects because that's what I know best and how they came about. So I embarked upon a project going back to probably 2000, and I think I started in 2006, where I was at the LCS and I bought a box of Upper Deck Hockey Rookie Update, and I pulled one of the dual auto rookie inspiration cards, whoever it was, Dominic Hasek and Ed Belfour, or something. Wouldn't have been those two guys, but a 2-player autograph card. And I got the card. I'm like, this card's awesome. I love it. I love the player combinations. So then what you do is you pull a card that you like, and then you go look at the checklist for that set, what insert set in this case. And you have to review the checklist and say, does the checklist resonate with me? What percentage of the checklist resonates with me? 100%? Great. It's a candidate. Or is it you only like 10% of it? In which case, well, maybe I'm not going to chase the whole set because 90% of the players I don't care about. What happened is I pulled that dual auto rookie inspirations from the 05-06 set of Upper Deck Rookie Update. That led me on a project to complete the checklist for all 3 years that they did that insert set. And it went back 2 years before. So I could, finish that off in, let's say, a year. And I did. And that was one of my first sort of, projects in the modern time. In the 80s, I was collecting all the 1,000-point men in hockey. I thought that's a cool way to collect hockey cards. I wanted their rookie cards. So that way I would cover all the guys that were, likely Hall of Famers and had really left their mark on the sport, and were all players I was aware of. But back to the rookie inspirations, the way that I came across the decision, or the way I made the decision, or it even entered into my periphery, was I pulled the card out of a box, loved it, researched the checklist, and off I went. That's one way.
Mm-hmm.
Another way is you're at a card show, or you're at an LCS, or you're surfing the internet, one of the marketplaces, and you see a card that you like, that looks nice to you. Again, I'm coming back to aesthetics. If you like the way a card looks, if you can hold the card in your hand, whether it's yours or somebody else's, and you're like, I love the way this looks, and you might get the butterfly in your stomach, you might get that physiological response. I get it with cards. Maybe I'm unique in that way, but I know some others do too. that's a sign that maybe I want to research what other cards are on the checklist. I'm a big proponent of not being a prisoner to a checklist, because the checklist is developed by somebody at the card company who is not the same fan of the sport as you are. So I have no, if there's a 50 card checklist, Mike, I have no problem reworking that checklist. So maybe I only want 20 of the players, and I will eliminate 30 from that checklist and not chase them, because I don't want to buy cards of players I don't care about. Now, I do have a project where I do that. So, you know, I'm not perfect. I do sometimes go against my own advice, but I have the freedom to do that. I can collect however the heck I want. So, you know, there is in Upper Deck, the Cup, there's the base cards, and then there's the base patch parallels out of 10, the patch variations or the parallels, whatever you want to call them. I love these cards. I've been collecting them for years, and I collect them from all the different sets, from 2005 the Cup to 2021 the Cup. I've got 400 of these cards now. I think I'm right at 400 right now. That's an ongoing project. Probably will never end, because I'll probably never complete it, and that's okay. I want it to last a long time. I want this to be something that I'm always working on, and it is. But I love the cards, Mike. Like, I just love the way they look. I love the look and feel, the design, and they're all. I love the patches. I don't collect the ones with autographs. In one of the years, maybe 2014, they started introducing autographs on some of these cards. Well, that was an easy way for me to eliminate a part of the checklist, because number one, I don't collect them with autographs, and number two, they're just that much more expensive. So now I'm not going to have to spend that money. So, you know, you see a card you like, research the checklist, and then decide to what extent you want to chase that, and that can become the project. And then you have to decide, well, if the company releases that product again next year and the year after, and that same insert set every year, do you want to keep on collecting them, or do you want to just stick to 1 year? To me, it all starts with aesthetics and my overall attraction to the card.
You hit the two most important parts, I think. So when I reached out to some others about this question, Mike Gioseffi over at Sports Card Nonsense put it in the best, simplest way possible. He said, I don't put a lot of thought into it. If I like the way the card looks and I like the checklist, then I want to do the project. And that kind of resonated with me in putting it in such simple terms. But there's a lot of nuance, and I really like what you said about being able to define your own subset, because there's no hobby enforcement saying you must collect the entire checklist. And there's different ways you can do that. You could, if you're more of a card guy than a fan of the sport per se, which sometimes I identify that way, then maybe I love the look of whatever, Upper Deck Allure, and I want to collect this rare parallel, but only one player from each team. That's a nice way to kind of condense the checklist down. Another way is to just simply pick your top 5 or your top 10 players, and then that's how you define a subset. But I want to reel back to the very first thing you said, which was through the dual rookie inspiration card. What I love about that story you shared is that it invoked this emotion for you, and you had that memory of opening the card. And every time that you chase another card from that checklist, it brings you back to when you pulled that card and the excitement you had and the connection to your past, the nostalgia of things. I had the very same experience in 2021 when I was kind of getting more serious back into golf card collecting. And I opened a hobby box of Upper Deck artifacts, and I pulled a Matthew Wolff Diamond Relic card. And for those of you who have listened to my show, you know I'm obsessed with Diamond Relics, and I'm obsessed with Matthew Wolff. I was already a fan of Matthew Wolff, not to that extreme. And I already kind of liked the idea of diamond cards, but pulling that myself, and I was videotaping myself because I wasn't sure how I wanted to contribute to the hobby space. And I thought, I'll just do a box opening and upload it to YouTube. I was an absolute novice. It's cringeworthy to look back at it, and it's still on YouTube if anybody wants to watch. But I lost my SHIT when I pulled the card. I was scared of handling it. I thought, oh my God, this card is so cool. And looking back, it was valuable at the time, because we all know cards are expensive when they're first released. But nowadays it's a $20, $30 card, but it put me down this path. Now I have a couple of the Tiger Woods cards. I've got 2 of the Jack Nicklaus cards. I've got the entire set. And now I'm so obsessed with it, I'm doing a second set over. And it all brings me back to that time sitting at my desk on a weekend, and it invokes memories from that time. My wife was pregnant with our first baby, so life was a lot different then. We didn't have little feet puttering around the house. We didn't have all the noise. It was a simpler time, and everything around me in that moment kind of comes rushing back when I look at all of my diamond relics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the beauty of collecting. We're talking about, projects, and I think having projects is just a more organized and focused way to be a collector. Like, let's face it, it's always been about projects, because you wanted to collect the complete 1983 Topps baseball set. Well, fill in your binder sheets, their 9 pocket pages. That was a project. And it was, and it didn't matter if you liked the players or not, because they cost nothing back then. Nowadays, and you mentioned what Mike Giuseppe said, and I agree with what Mike said. Obviously, I said the same thing, but I take it to the next level. What he said was, if I like the looks and I like the checklist, well, I don't need to like the checklist in order to embark upon a project, because I have the power to customize that checklist for myself. So do you, so does Mike,
Mm-hmm.
so does everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I just want to switch gear a little bit here and talk about player collections, because the hobby seems to be driven by player collectors. Like, you collect this guy or that guy. And I find that to be a very limiting approach. And if you collect, so many player collectors end up so disappointed when their player gets traded. They get,
Mm-hmm.
you see, a player gets traded the next day on Facebook or message boards or wherever you see available. Like, people get so pissed off and they just want to sell off their player collection. So I've come up with a new way to collect players. And that is, and this, again, you can customize every different thing that I'm about to say. But for me, I have about 40 player collections. Now, a couple of them have, 100 cards in them, but most of them have under 10. Some of them have 2 or 3. I like my 3 card player collections, and nobody out there can tell me that you're not a player collector. You only have 3 of his cards. I say, yes, I am. I get to define what makes me a player collector, not you. So I really have embraced, because there's so many players that I admire and that I like their cards, that I want to collect them, but I don't want to have to feel like I need to add every card I see of theirs. So what I've done is said to myself, okay, I'm gonna collect Joe Sakic cards, or Ron Francis, or Shane Doan, one of my favorites as well, by the way, Mike. But my player PC, I'm gonna max it out at 10 cards, or 5 or 3, depends on how much I like the player. And now, if I see an 11th card, well, I might force myself to move out a card that I like less to bring in the new one. Now, I don't have to. I also reserve the right to turn that 10 card player PC into an 11 card PC. Or maybe now I'll say, okay, you know what? I broke the barrier. I'm at 11 now. I'm going to let myself go up to 15. Like, you have to allow yourself to be flexible, but also there's no rules. And because there's no rules, you can break your own rules as much as you want. That's up to us as collectors. But back to my 30, 40 different player PCs, and I do have it. I have it organized, and I have a folder called PC by player, and I got 37 different folders within that one folder right now. And I'd have to go through them all to see, but I'm guessing that some of them only have a few cards, 4 or 5 cards. And to me, that doesn't make me not a collector of that player. It just makes me a very disciplined and not a very deep collector of that player, but I still have representation. So customizing your checklist by player, by set, whatever it is, even let's say you want all the Hall of Famers. Well, maybe you want all the Hall of Famers, but you only want the Hall of Famers that you know, or that that you're interested in. Well, you can eliminate the others. If there's 300 Hall of Famers in baseball, no one says you need to own all of them except yourself. So you can say, I'm gonna go through, and this is so much fun too, Mike. You can take the list of 300 Hall of Famers, and I'm sure it's more than that, and you can whittle it down to 100, whichever 100 you want. But let's say there's a big tie. Let's say there's 3 players that could get in on that 100 spot. Well, go to 102. And no one's stopping you. Go to 102. I think the biggest takeaway for me when it comes to projects, again, aesthetics, define your checklist, and then define the depth upon which you want to go. Because this hobby is never ending. It's like, I remember thinking to myself 10 years ago, wow, they keep on coming out with all these awesome cards. What are they going to think of next? And here we are 10 years later. And every year I can say that about something that comes on. Oh my God, I love the looks of that. You have to also be able to say, no, I don't need to add that to my list of projects because I can't afford it. And my head will be everywhere.
In terms of how projects fail, Brett McGrath got back to me from Stacking Slabs, and he said one of the biggest reasons is that you end up spending time and money and taking that away from collections that are more significant to us and applying that to whatever is the latest and greatest and shiniest. So
yeah, and the other thing that often happens is that people will complete a set, whatever set it is, and then right away it's all for sale. Some people, all they want to do is chase. Once the chase is finished and they have the set done, they're done with it. They're now ready to sell it off, which is great for someone like me who recently was the beneficiary of someone who's completed the set and sold it off. And I was able to pick up a whole bunch of cards from my collection because of that. I never really understood that, but I do understand that once you're done, the rush is over. And now they're just sitting in a box somewhere. Maybe they're on display somewhere. So the fun of that project is now over. The journey, it's about the journey, not the destination. I think that's true for collectors like this. And I've done it too. I've put together sets, 10, 12, 15 years ago, Mike, that I pull out every so often. It's like, you know what? I don't need these cards anymore. So then what I do is I apply my new methodology, which is in this 50 card set of Upper Deck premium patches from Ultimate. I don't want all 50. I only want 12 of these guys' cards. And I'm going to just get rid of the rest and use the proceeds to pick up other cards for my other projects. And I've done that several times. And it's almost, I feel like it's an ongoing process, but which is also because of that experience that I have, it's also allowed me to be that much better at picking my next project or any other project that I'm going to add to my collecting portfolio. The journey's obviously very, very important, but I don't want the journey to consist of players I don't care about.
Absolutely. I think there's two aspects of creating a project. There's the journey, the excitement, the networking, the dopamine hits you get when your card pops up on eBay. And so there's certainly that aspect of it, but you also want to find something that's exciting for you to own once it's complete. How can you be fulfilled once you've completed it? Is that displaying it? Is that having it in what I call my special box, where when friends or family come to visit who know nothing about sports cards and they ask me about the hobby, that's the box I run down to my basement and I grab, and the stuff that I always want to show off. Is that what you want your project to be? But I like what you said about almost like diversifying, putting a limit of 10 cards per player. And that's actually exactly what Austin from Carlson Cards, what he did. He's a big football collector, and he will not own more than 10 cards per player. I love that. I don't know if it's for that exact reason. I think his mindset is more on budget. He can't, if there's one player he loves more than everybody else, then his entire collection would be that player, and he wouldn't have resources for anybody else. So he kind of caps everything at 10 so that he can diversify. And once you reach 10, then you've got this 1-for-1 replacement strategy, which, by the way, the 1-for-1 replacement was kind of this overarching resolution for me in 2024, because my collection's just grown so big, it's grown so wide, that I need to put this rule in place so that if I want to pick up a card, I need to get rid of a card, just in general. It doesn't have to be by category or by player. And it allows me to kind of shift from one project to another, prioritize, categorize. And you said some player collectors are just so devastated when their player is traded. A prime example of that is when Matthew Wolff defected over to Live. He was a rising star on the PGA Tour. He was 22 or 23 years old when he shifted over to Live. And so many people just outright gave up on him. And I'm not going to say I was too deep in collecting him, but I was well on my way. And I made a decision that I've got a personal connection to Matthew Wolff. I admire aspects of his story. He's a champion for mental health. He's got such a unique swing that I love watching. Like, nobody else can replicate what he does when he swings the golf club. And it just makes it fun to watch. There's so many other, even personal ties to where he went to school with my family. And when the Live drama was going on, I wasn't on the Live side of the fence. But maybe Matthew Wolff, I can continue to collect him and follow him. And maybe it's a way for me to not be one of these extremists. This isn't politics. There's no two parties here. I don't have to just like one thing. It's okay if I follow him on his journey. And if he goes to a team or a league that isn't my main thing, then so be it. I'll continue following him.
I always say, like, I fall out of love with cards, and I then permit myself to get rid of them. And that's fine. We have the ultimate control over our collections. Projects are a nice way to organize and streamline and set a boundary, so that you're not so that you can respect your budget and you can not go broke or go into debt. I like what you talked about, Austin Carlson, and the way he does it. A strict 10 card maximum. I respect the heck out of that, because you're still getting 10 cards. The other thing, how many cards of a player do we need? Now, some people want every card ever made because, it's like a obsessive compulsive sort of thing, to the point of addiction, which I'd rather be addicted to sports cards than some other things. That's for sure. Right. I'm okay. I think it's and I don't mean breaking, rip and wax, because that's a bit different. But if you're, buying your favorite player, I think that's quite all right. But how many cards of a player do we need? I mean, I was collecting Dale Hawerchuk. He's, I'm from Winnipeg originally, and he was our like big Hall of Famer there when I grew up. Looked up to him as a kid in the 80s. And I collected him. I've been collecting him since the 80s. And I think I had over 300 cards of his at one point, which is nothing compared to what some people have there. Some people have, 8, 10, 12,000 cards of their player if he's a very popular player with lots of cards. But I was over 300 cards. I thought, I don't need 300 cards of this guy. Like, I just don't need them. So then I go through this whittle down process where every so often I look through the cards, say, do I still love you? Yes or no. Do I still love you? Yes. It's like I'm asking, do I love you anymore? And then I move them into the almost gonna get rid of pile. And that pile sits there for a couple of weeks. I call it limbo. I put it in limbo. And then I'll let a couple of weeks go by, and then I'll look at that limbo pile, and I'll bring some back into the PC. I just did it the other day with my Gretzky collection, where these two Gretzky cards here, the Fire on Ice and the Stubble from 97, these were in I'm going to get rid of these cards. I must have looked at them one time and said, I don't need these ones. And well, I looked at them again because, our moods change. Our circumstances change. And I'm like, you know what? These are too cool. I'm not ready to part with these. So I brought them back out of my limbo/trader box and put them back into my PC. And that's always fun, because that is the cheapest way to shop for cards, is to buy them from your own inventory,
I love
it. Doesn't cost you anything, and you get to add to your PC again, even though they originated there.
Buy them from your own inventory. That reminds me, another way to just get fulfillment instead of spending money is to just flip through your old cards, even if it's not in that limbo pile. If you could just go through your old sets and just, honestly, you'll find stuff you forgot about. I do it every day. I call it fondling. I know it's kind of an awkward word, but I'll fondle through all my cards, and I'll come across stuff that I was so excited about. I had a great mail day, and then it collected dust, and that's a nice way to not spend money.
Or you go through your existing cards because they're sitting in a box in your closet. You actually go through them and you find cards that you don't want anymore. But that's beautiful, because that you can convert those into new cards that you do want. And that's the ongoing, that's the living nature of your PC. It doesn't have to be stagnant. It doesn't have to be cemented in concrete. You can give yourself, like, if I could inspire one person out there who is stuck in thinking that what they have to keep forever, you don't, unless you want to, you don't. You can move cards out and then use the proceeds for new cards. Don't be a slave to a checklist, and don't be even a slave to yourself from years ago.
I do that all the time when I'm looking through my old cards. Sometimes you find one that you get excited about, and it's like shopping from your own collection. Other times you find one that you say, why did I spend so much money on this? I'm going to liquidate this, and it's a way to actually make money through your own collection.
And you might even profit. If not profit, at least you're putting in more money that you can use to buy other cards that you like more on that at that time. Yeah.
You're inspiring me to get a little bit more organized, because I've got my pile, which is cards I've listed on eBay. And so it's kind of my active listed cards, but I'm going to create a second pile and maybe sort it right next to it, where these are the guys on the chopping block. These are the ones standing on the plank. They're about to jump ship. let them sit in limbo, and if I can stare at them long enough, it'll help me decide, is it
I
time?
actually like that. Yeah. I had a box that was called, I had like on my card, my boxes, I keep my cards, and I take a Post-it note, and I take the sticky part and I write what it is, and then I cut off the part that doesn't have sticky, and I affix that to the side of the box. And I used to have one that said limbo. If I don't have a limbo box right now, because I don't have anything really in limbo. It's either in my trader box or it's in my one of my PC boxes. But what I would do next, Mike, is I wouldn't call it limbo. I'm going to start calling it the chopping block. I like that actually better. So you've impacted my style right now.
Awesome. Speaking of those little cutouts, here's one right now. This one is my grade pile, ? Cards I haven't quite, looked over to know if they should be graded.
See those boxes down there?
Yeah.
Those all have a little yellow thing on them, right? On the side. That tells me what's in them. And yeah.
There you go. I found my limbo sticker. It isn't limbo, but it's another little sticky note, and it says TBD. So basically that's where I was putting cards that I wasn't sure what to do with. Should I get them graded? Should I put them into a PC? Is this a project I want to start? It's a card I bought on impulse. What's the next step? I don't know. So I had a little pile called TBD.
Yeah, so time. Let's talk about timing on this now, because what I find has worked for me is whenever I'm about to go to a card show, which I don't go to card shows every weekend. If I'm going to the expo in Toronto twice a year, the one in Edmonton once a year, the national in the States once a year, the Burbank show, I will go through my PC and kind of go through that process of, do I love you anymore? Do I still love you? And the ones that I don't, then they go into that limbo box, and they may or may not come on that trip with me, and they may or may not end up in my trader box, in my showcase, or whatever. But everybody can look at this and go through this whittling process at whatever frequency you want. What I find works is right before, like 2 weeks before a card show, because then that gives me 2 weeks to decide, do I really want to dispose of this card, or do I want to keep it? Like, that's the whole purpose of this limbo or chopping block box, is don't make a rash decision. Let it simmer for a bit, revisit it, because you don't want to have seller's remorse or dispose or trader's remorse. Then you got to go find the card again, which happens to all of us, which is okay too.
Brian, the owner of Ship My Cards, had a great story about that. Was that on? I think it was on Sports Card Live, where he had a $200 Penny Hardaway. I think it was a gold Prizm, if my memory's right. He sold it in 2018 kind of time frame for $200, and then during the pandemic, he rebought it for $8,000.
Yeah,
and we've all been through a situation like that. Maybe not as extreme. I could pick your brain forever about organizing our cards. That 2 weeks before the show, Brett over at Stacking Slabs calls that Judgment Day. That's the day where you take your limbo stack. One gets a red pill and one gets a blue pill, and which ones are going off to the consignment. I actually love that. So a tip and a trick that Iowa Dave shared with me was, we all can have a lot of different ideas. The hobby is a divergent activity. You can create endless lists of sets, players, types of cards, themes, whatever. What he said is the only times that he's successful with committing to a project is when he physically writes it out by hand on a piece of paper, a notebook, maybe a sticky note, I don't know. But if this hobby planning and list of cards just lives in the Notes app on your iPhone, it's like this black vortex that isn't really a commitment. What do you think of that?
I mean, I think we all have our own approaches. I think that's very specific to Iowa Dave, and if it works for him, great. My approach is different. I get a card into the collection, I scan it, and then I keep a database of images of all my cards, and it's basically called PC. The big folder is called PC, and then within it I have all my subfolders of my different projects, my different player collections, my different sets I've collected. And once the picture gets in there, it's now part of my collection. I can obviously take it out if I want to, but and then I just use Dropbox for this. And then I have the Dropbox app on my phone, and if I'm out and about or someone sends me a message and they say, hey, do you need this one? Because I get a lot of that, I can just go into my Dropbox, on my phone or at home on the computer and see if I have that card. Because sometimes, you just don't remember. And if I, that's how I manage it. So,
maybe Dave's living in the Stone Age, and modern men and women can keep track of their goals and objectives digitally. And, I'm sure there's more than one way to skin a cat.
I think that's very specific to Dave's style. And all I say is whatever works for you, if that's what works. And if listeners to that podcast or this one are inspired by that and think that would work for them, then go ahead and do it. I mean, if that's going to work for you and help you feel more in control and have more direction, focus on your collecting, go ahead and do it. I mean, your ideas have to come from somewhere. So if they're not original to your own head, and you're inspired by somebody's style or approach, methodology, kind of process, then emulate it for sure. I'm sure Dave's, I'm sure that's worked for some other people that have listened to his him talking about it.
For sure. Speaking of what works for you, we've talked about personal connection as being an inspiration, hometown heroes, basically finding something that inspires you. Do you have any, final tips and tricks to get the most enjoyment, both from the process of building a project and also fulfillment from completing the project? Any final tips?
It's always a bit of a letdown when you complete a project. Again, like that's why a lot of people end up selling their cards off once they do it. So make sure you really like it. As far as like hometown hero, I would advise against collecting your current hometown hero, because they're likely going to sign as a free agent somewhere else pretty soon. Like it just happens to everybody these days, the way the professional sports has gone in the past 25 years. It depends how old you are. Look back at a player who you really like to watch, or I don't even like to say looked up to, but a player that you respected back in your earlier years. That's something. I still collect cards of those players. My favorite players from when I was a kid. I still collect those guys. I don't care what team they're on. I have that connection to them, those memories of being a kid. But now as an adult, and I have my favorite team here, the Calgary Flames. I don't collect anybody on the Calgary Flames. I have a few cards of Jarome Iginla, but I don't collect anybody. Why? Because they're not going to be here for very long. I just know that. And so hometown hero, it's more like hometown hero from when I was a kid. That I think
Shane Doan. Shane Doan is a good example. Yeah. I didn't realize you were from Winnipeg, but obviously he was drafted by Winnipeg, played there for one season, and maybe you still had some connection to him because it was actually the Winnipeg Jets franchise that moved down to Arizona. He ended up sticking with them for his entire career, so he's an exception and a very special player because of that.
And I do have one of my player PCs is Shane Doan. It's not a very big one because I recently whittled it down a little bit, but I've got 10 cards in my Shane Doan collection right now. And, if I want to, the fun thing about having multiple projects is that sometimes, like of those 10 cards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all of them are pulling double duty. All of them are part of my Doan collection, and they're also part of a different project. So I wasn't expecting all 10 of them, but I'm looking at them right now. They're all part of other projects besides being in my Shane Doan collection. Talk about bang for your.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, Austin would be proud that it's precisely 10. And I am a huge proponent of having cards for multiple reasons. It hits, the shiny bone, the set bone, the player collecting bone, the team bone, whatever theme it is that you're working on. My only challenge with that is, what pile do I put it in? Do I put it in the set? Do I put it in? And there you go. And having everything digitally organized means that you can have a single card that fills a position within multiple lanes of your collection. So, and if you sort and organize yourself digitally, you can keep track of that because it's just pixels on a screen that you can apply in multiple collections.
Exactly. Or do you need multiple copies? Some people do that. Like this card here, for example, from 2014 Upper Deck Masterpieces, number 73. It's also, I have it in 2 folders. There it is again, right there, number 73. Wow. This is one of my favorite projects that I'm working on, and I'm 9 cards away. I've been working on it for 10 years. So as I share my screen with you, but it takes time to stay on top of it. Like managing a collection is it's a job if you have, hundreds of cards, for sure.
Well, I hope you guys got as much out of that interview as I got from hosting it. Because as I said at the beginning, Jeremy is a hobby Hall of Famer, in my opinion. And he really helped me understand projects better in the hobby. I personally got some takeaways, like how to limit the checklist and make a subset of cards, specifically if I'm trying to either work on my budget or just eliminate cards that I don't want of unnecessary players. His kind of unexpected thoughts on player collecting had me interested, because as a Matthew Wolff collector, for instance, I have dozens and dozens of his cards, and if I were to restart, would I perhaps only hang on to a few higher end ones? Perhaps. The discussion around digital organization, though, is something that, man, I really want to look into that. I told Jeremy once the recording stopped that I honestly felt a bit shamed after seeing how amazing his setup is, all of his scans. And, I definitely related more to what Iowa Dave said about using a pen and paper rather than the Notes app on my phone. So I definitely want to maybe trend more towards the digital age and start scanning some of my cards. And I really love the idea that a particular card can have dual purpose, and it can count towards a player PC, it can count towards a set PC, it can count towards an insert parallel type of lane PC. And on that topic of having a card with multi-purpose, that brings us into Card of the Week. This week's Card of the Week is actually in tandem with the Card of the Week from 2 episodes ago. It is the 2021 Upper Deck Metal Universe Champions Colin Morikawa Retro Star Rubies. I absolutely love this card because it hits that multi-purpose theme that Jeremy and I were talking about. I do like Colin Morikawa, but I don't necessarily need a giant PC. And so if I want one of his high-end cards, I'm going to pursue something that also ticks more than one box. Well, one of the other boxes it ticks is that I wanted to complete the entire Retro Star Ruby set. I now have completed it for 2021. I have the Will Zalatoris for 2022. All I need is the Tiger Woods for 2022 to keep my run going year over year. So I may end up showing off the rest of these Retro Star Rubies, but for today, we're celebrating Colin Morikawa. My final thought I'm going to leave you guys with today is the idea that Jeremy was challenging the premise that collectors should deeply examine our why of collecting. I kind of took it for granted when Paul Hickey and Iowa Dave and these guys that I'm connected with in the hobby talk about having some discipline when it comes to purchasing cards, not allowing your impulses to take over, and having a deep understanding of your why you collect certain cards or why you collect in general. And it just was so refreshing hearing Jeremy say it's okay to collect cards because you just simply love cardboard. And honestly, I kind of find myself in that category. I do have stories behind my cards. I've got personal connections to my cards. But at the end of the day, I collect cards because I've always loved cards. I've always just loved holding them, looking at them, collecting them. And that's good enough reason. As long as you have a budget, you stay within it, you don't overextend yourself, and you don't buy stuff that you're going to regret or that you hate, or you allow addictive kind of tendencies to take over. I want to explore that in a future episode. But this premise that collectors need a deep, dark why of collecting is something I want to explore as well. So since this came up through Paul Hickey as his kind of concept, I'm going to challenge him someday to a duel. Not actually a duel, just a friendly conversation, basically, to understand, from an investor's and a collector's perspective, why does it really matter to understand the deep down why? Thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to check out the card of the week and all the other good stuff, check out at Fondling Cardboard on Instagram. That's where I post card of the week pictures. Also check out my personal Instagram, which is at The Golf Card Collector. Can't wait for next week's episode with Brett McGrath from Stacking Slabs. We're going to dive back into golf cards with his fandom of Panini, Prizm, and kind of connecting golf as a niche sport to his niche collecting, which is wrestling cards. I do this podcast for myself because I just love trading cards and I need an outlet, a way to participate in the hobby that doesn't involve me spending too much money. But if you're feeling friendly, if you really enjoyed this episode, please just send this link to a friend. Tell somebody you enjoyed the Fondling Cardboard podcast. Tell them there's this crazy guy named Mike who loves golf cards because the more the merrier, and I want to grow this community. Thanks again. See you next week.